Live. Yes, and we are live. Hello, everybody. It is Micha Green, DC editor for the Afro-American newspapers. I am so excited to be talking to really a woman and a hero who I've looked up to since I can remember. I guess since I was born, the great, legendary, as we call here in the DC area, the forever First Lady, Cora Masters Barry. First of all, how are you doing?
I'm really doing really great. I'm blessed. This is difficult times for everyone, but God has not only allowed me to be here and thrive, but to do things and reach out and try to help other people. So I'm doing great. I feel very, very fortunate.
Well, you look amazing. I know you just got back in town, and you're looking healthy and beautifully melanated,
Very much,
and
very
skin
much so.
skin is glowing. I have to ask, how are you faring in ensuring that you're remaining healthy during these very hard times? I mean, we're seeing so many of the people in our community suffering. How are you remaining healthy?
Well, I have the Southeast Tennessee Learning Center, so at some point we'll probably discuss that. And we were in the middle of a production called Blacks and Wax, which I'm think you're familiar with because you guys have interviewed and done a lot of things with us. And we were about to go up, I mean, to go, in production, and then we shut down. So I would say the first 20, 30 days, it was sort of weird. You was like in some alternate universe. But then, once you realize that, well, this is going to be something you're going to have to deal with. I started looking for silver linings. And so for me, I live in a space in Southeast Washington, right off Martin Luther King. And as I told Bernice King herself, anytime somebody tells you they live on Martin Luther King, they living in the hood. So I'm living stone cold right in the hood. And so, but I face a park. There's nothing around me but woods. And so I just looked at that. I have a front porch. I was able to sit on my porch. I'm blessed with people who look out for me. I never had to go to the grocery store, not one time through this whole thing, because either someone was bringing prepared meals or people were just dropping out food. So I didn't have that. None of the toiletry things, because I admit to being a Costco addict. So prior to the shutdown, I had enough toilet paper for the neighborhood. So I had toilet paper, paper towels, everything. So I still have a lot. So I mean, it was horrible to watch on television the loss of lives and the suffering. It was even more damaging to my heart to watch the slow agonizing, torturous death of George Floyd. And as a political scientist and a historian, I was recording history both in terms of archives, but also in terms of, heartbreak. And then because I come out of a generation, I call it the greatest generation that ever lived, and that was the boomers. That was the ones who were born around the time I was born. I kind of appropriate boomer, but
Mhm.
I really was born on Victory Day. I wasn't a war baby. I was a victory baby. But we changed the world in the 60s, and I was right in the middle of it. So when I see this, I see a lot of the similarities. So I guess that's a long answer to say it's been a mixed bag,
Mhm.
but I am still healthy. I'm more importantly than being physically healthy, I have been able to maintain my mental health
Yeah.
because I know a lot of people who really had a hard time just getting through the isolation of it all and the fear of it all. So I'm good.
Yeah. You hit on a couple of really important topics that we talk a lot about at the Afro that I'd love for you to break down. First of all, mental health, Black mental health, but also all that you do for the community, obviously with the Southeast Tennis Learning Center. You're doing some amazing things. I tuned into the town hall that was held a few weeks ago. That was so empowering to hear the voices of these young people and them share what they're experiencing, what they're worried about. I'm curious. The third thing that you touched on that I thought was so important is the fact that they're out there and using their voices and doing this very similar thing that happened in the 60s. I'm curious, what is the role of the youth right now, and where are they? What are they experiencing from what you're hearing from your students and further?
Well, I deal with several generations of young people.
Yeah. It's looking like we're a bit frozen, but let's see. We're gonna see if Mrs. Barry can come in and come back out. Let's see. You guys in the comments, tell us if you are frozen on your side, or it might just be me. But I think that it is Mrs. Barry. So we're going to give her a little bit of a second to see if she can come back in and come back out. Yeah, no, it is definitely frozen on my side for her. See if she can come back in and come back out, and we'll get this started. Again, we are live and waiting for Cora Masters Barry, a great historian, political scientist, a mentor, entrepreneur, and leader here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we also know her as a former First Lady, or as many people say, forever First Lady of the District of Columbia. She was married to who is affectionately known as the Mayor for Life, but Marion Barry. So we're going to give Mrs. Barry a little bit more time to hop back on with us and see if she can get back into the stream. I'm sure she'll be back in any moment. But we will see what that is doing in a second. In the meantime, guys, feel free to write some questions and or comments for Mrs. Barry here in the stream. When she comes back, I will try to get to all of them and ensure that your voice and or your question is heard. I know there's a lot that you're probably curious about, not only about her own life, but she knows a lot of people and has been really active with a lot of people in a lot of organizations. And so we're going to talk about that. She was very close to Congressman John Lewis, who recently passed. So we're going to talk about some of her collaborations with him and her visions for the future. She has seen not only the DC area, but nationwide, a lot of change. And she had the opportunity to be at the forefront of that, but also as a political scientist and historian to be someone who is recording that history and sharing it with the masses. So there's a whole lot that we can talk about with Cora Barry today, and I'm looking forward to doing so. Let me see what's going on. Let's see if we are still live, if she's coming back in or not. Nope. Okay. So in the meantime, like I said, please, everybody, write your questions down in the comments as we wait for Cora Masters Barry to rejoin us. While those who are just joining us, I will say some of the awesome things that Mrs. Barry was talking about before she went away, or before the connection went bad, was that how she's been able to fare during this pandemic, during these protests, all that's been going on. Again, she was alive in the 60s, and as a historian, political scientist, has looked at a lot of what was happening previously and in previous years and other previous revolutions, and comparing it to now. And here she is. I was breaking down.
I was back earlier. I was waving, but I could see you and hear you, but you couldn't see and hear me. But I'm back.
Look, you heard me giving your life, trying to give your life story.
Yeah. Well, then we can do that too. That's fine.
Look, well, no, I was just saying, for those that are just tuning back in, you were sort of breaking down your background as a political scientist, as a historian, as a professor, as an educator, and comparing it to what we've seen in the 60s and in previous revolutions to where we are now but then you were also talking about what's going on with the youth. So you're back, and here she is.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that God has blessed me with is an ability to relate and connect with young people. I think that's so important. And so, over and above the wonderful young people that do blacks and wax and do all those wonderful things at the center, I have younger women like Tamika Mallory and, well, even Angela also Brooks, different young women that I relate to. I don't want to say mentor. We mentor each other, but guide them, give them a little historical perspective. For instance, I've now started, or I'm a part of a podcast, Rolling Out with Mustard Steve.
Yes.
And there's a segment called There's Nothing New Under the Sun. And that comes from the fact that as guiding and supporting and involved myself with Tamika, she's had some hard times. And so when they offered the show, I said to Tamika, they want me to do a show. I have no idea what to call it. And she said, well, every time you talk to me, she called me Miss Cora. Every time you talk to me, you're always telling me, no matter what I say, you always say to me, because there's nothing new under the sun. It's just your turn. And, you have to do these things. You have to go through something to be something. People just don't show up and become great and wonderful just because they were born. I mean, some people do, but that's fake. But for the most part, most greatness is earned. And so in doing that, there's a lot of tunnels and valleys that you have to go through. Everybody's gone through them down through the years. So my show is that, and it is an intergenerational show. So for the most part, I talk to young people like yourself, and we talk about then and now and how that impacts here and what's the difference and how can we move forward. So I just find these young people like we were, because I was a black, I wasn't a civil rights person. I was a black liberation person. I was a black power person. I was to a large degree of Pan-Africanism. So when they were holding hands across each other singing "We Shall Overcome," I was like, yeah. So I mean, that was my orientation. My God or leader was Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. That was the person who opened my eyes and who I looked to for information. And so now here we are with a whole generation. And the only major difference that I see between then and now, well, that's a major difference, is one, you got social media, so they can mobilize in 5 minutes. Where these people come from? They don't have to send a letter. They don't have to make a phone call. Just, I don't know how they do it. IG, EI, I call them all. My daughters and them crack up on me because I don't remember all these initials. So that's one thing, is they have the benefit of that. And then on one hand, that's a benefit. And on the other hand, like I used to always say, same thing, make you laugh, make you cry. And then the other side of it is also, I see a lot more integration. Now, in the 60s, they did have white people, especially coming from the North, mostly Jewish, who joined the movement. But this movement right here, even though it's called BLM, Black Lives Matter movement, it is an interracial movement. And I really don't think there's a dominance of color. I just think it depends on what part of the country you are in. But wherever you go, you're going to see interracial. So, and that's very powerful.
As a political scientist, I know that you have been able to track sort of in an academic way. But did you see this coming? Did you see this revolution coming?
I am on the Commission of Arts and Humanities in Washington, D.C. The mayor put me on there, and I describe it as an episode out of The Help. And I'm answering this because one of the things that we started was a task force on equity, inclusion, and belonging. And one of the people who don't look like us said, and I quote, well, none of this, all this is just happening because of George Floyd. Before then, we didn't have a problem. And I looked at her and I said, well, you sound like somebody straight out of Gone with the Wind. So before these Yankees came down here, we was just fine. Everybody was just so happy. So George Floyd was a trigger. I mean, the issue of race, the issue of lack of equity, the issue of fairness, the issue of systemic racism and the all of that. It's been going on. Now, what happened was we blew it up in the 60s, and they put some safeguards in place. I mean, without going through it alone, because I'm a political science professor, so please feel very free to say, okay, that's enough. But
No, give us some education today.
We blew it up in the 60s. You know, we confronted it, and as a result of that, the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, equal protection under the law, and the 1965 Voting Rights Bill. And then Lyndon B. Johnson was president at that time, so he started a great society where a lot of the safeguards, everything from Medicaid, Medicare to student defense loans, all those things, not only to address the inequities, but address the past impact. So in other words, it's not good enough to say, well, you just have to let them in now. No. They got to have a little extra. So we're going to give them, you know, certain slots that they can fill, and all that happened. And voting, you know, it was at a high. We elected, my husband came out of that. We elected our first big city mayors out of that. Stokes out of Cleveland, Ohio, Andy Young. In Atlanta, Maynard Jackson in Indiana, Richard Hatcher. I can go across the country. So we started getting elected officials. And then after Johnson left came Nixon. And Nixon started cutting things back, the Bakke decision, and taking things back. And, you know, some of the gains that we had achieved started getting taken away. So as a result of that, we stopped so much talking about race. I watched it. You know, back then in the 60s, it was Black power, Black people, white people. Then it got to be minorities, people of color, marginalized communities, at risk. I mean, I can just go through all the lists. Those were all codes for Black people. So we stopped calling ourselves Black. We started calling ourselves a minority. And so when we would bring up something that was discriminatory, they would say, there you go, race baiting. And after doing that over a period of time, then we stopped acknowledging that there was an issue of race out loud, but we knew it was inside, and we knew it was with each other, and we knew that everywhere we went, race was an issue. So I'm saying all that to say, where we got from Black power to minorities and people of color has gone from full circle, where we're back to being Black again. Mm-hmm. But that blew up. It was laying dormant. It was there. It was being discussed. I know you know that we face discrimination. But when George Floyd was killed, we was like, okay, this is it. You know, he wasn't the first person to be killed. He wasn't the first person to be killed on television. But right. It was just, but I think coming out of being in the pandemic, being all locked up and quarantined, out of a job, no work, no money, and then on the top of this, you know, state sanctioned genocide of our people, blew it up. I saw it coming. I just didn't know what was going to be the trigger. That's the answer to your question.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for, you know, taking us through that history. You know, it's scary to me that so many people act like George Floyd was something new. They act like Ahmaud Arbery is something new. And it's so scary that we, you know, still have these hashtags and have these names, and are using social media to do it. But I know a lot of politicians walk a fine line and how they're able to address things. I know that your husband came from a movement where it was okay to say what he wanted to say. But what is the role of our leaders in this moment, and how can they lead and, you know, still sort of be politically correct but address these issues?
Well, when Marion died, he died November 23rd, 2014. He died on a Saturday before Thanksgiving.
Mm.
So he every year would do these amazing Thanksgiving giveaways. I mean, more than a turkey. I mean, he'd give you like a whole week's of food. And it was like, huge. So he died on a Saturday. On Wednesday, after he died, an article came out that he had interviewed for the week before. And in the interview, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and 2 days or 3 days after he died, in the interview, the reporter asked him, people want to know, where did you get your money to do all of this? I mean, where'd the money come from? And Marianne said to her, don't nobody want to know that, but some nosy white people up in Northwest, is none of their business. And I looked at this and I said, this absolutely is the last time you will ever hear an elected official actually tell the truth and call it out. They just don't do it. So I do agree and understand that this is a different era, but to Marion Barry, someone who will speak truth to power, someone who will call race what it is. We have a city council, and most of the people on the city council I respect, but very, very few times do I hear them address an issue face on that deals with our people. And part of that is conditioning. The other part of that is they're just scared. And this is a city that we're still 40-45% Black, but it's the tail wagging the dog in terms of who's really taking power over in this city. So our elected officials, and we don't have a history of supporting our elected officials. If we would rise up and say, look, a council member, blah, 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 was right, you mess with him, you mess with us, we'd have a different ball game. But I think everybody seems to have become anesthetized to liberation. I think George Floyd pushed it up a little bit, and people felt a little empowered and said a few words of a radical approach to this. But for the most part, our elected officials are basically compromisers. They might have to. I don't know, but some of them come from communities that they have nobody to answer to but their people. But you don't hear them really give truth to power like that. You just don't.
All right, this might be a dicey question, but I gotta ask. In this week's Afro, on our Washington front page, we have an article about how Mayor Bowser is calling for the more prosecution of these protesters to ensure that our prosecutors fully see through the protesters who were arrested. The MPD is under fire for how they are arresting protesters here in DC. Obviously, Bowser calling for the justice system, I think, in the way she is, it gets very difficult for Black people to hear, and particularly these organizations like Black Lives Matter DC are giving her the blues about it. Me taking the journalism hat off, am in a weird place looking at it, because when your husband, one of his many times of being mayor, my mom worked as PR in his crime division. So, the relationship that he had with the police was far different than what I see now as a journalist. And the relationship with the police and district residents was far different in the 90s than it is today. But what is going on? What is the mayor calling for? What do you think is happening? And and how can people be out on these streets and feel like they can safely protest when this is happening and protesters feel under attack by the mayor and MPD?
I actually know for a fact that not just this mayor, but many mayors have been talking, because what we're seeing as protests, I'd say 80% of it is, but there are people being paid to infiltrate these movements. They're bringing weapons. They are bringing bricks. There was something on Facebook once showing a white woman pulling up in a car, had a ton of bricks, and was giving them out. And this Black woman snatched her and took her and threw her in a car and said, "You trying to get people killed?" And that white boy who went up in Kenosha.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with the rifle.
Nice.
So what the mayor is in a situation of doing is protecting peaceful protesters and protecting the city, and they are looking for and arresting those people who are coming in intentionally, not protesting,
Mhm.
but doing breaking windows, throwing rocks. They have to be it's a hard position to be. She
Yeah,
created Black Lives Plaza
yeah,
so that the protesters would have a safe place to
right.
gather on a regular basis. Put your signs up, protest, have your marches. This is yours, and
Right.
gave them all of that. But this latest movement, which I think really is White House and Russian inspired, to infiltrate these so that it can gin up his law and order position in terms of getting reelected. So the mayor is faced with with the with the whole problem and the difficulty of protecting the protesters, protecting the city, and finding, arresting, and prosecuting these so-called protesters who are not really there to protest, but they're there to cause violence. That's
Yeah.
what, and I know this for a fact.
That I'm so happy you put it into that perspective, because it is, having to really deal with so many different sort of sides to the whole puzzle makes perfect sense. So thank you for that. And it does seem, and again, maybe this happened before and we just now have social media and things, but it does seem like you're right. These planted agitators, whether they're wearing blackface, whether they're
Mhm.
with rifles, whether they're, handing out bricks, to make it, almost seem as if the peaceful protesters are somehow, problematic, and or it truly does agitate the peaceful protesters when you see something. Um, all right, so I know our time is wrapping up. Normally, in this time, I would ensure that I was getting to people and answering their questions. But I do have a selfish last question for you, which is, what are next steps? We've had revolutions, and and I don't, and maybe it doesn't feel like every revolution has been, you know, every chapter of that revolution is fully closed. I just saw the other day that they are just putting a statue for Fred Hampton up, and Fred Hampton's mom holding the statue. And I'm like, he has been gone for 50 years.
Yeah, but they killed all of our leaders. They killed them
Yeah,
all. They ran Stokely Carmichael out the country. They killed Elrich Cleaver, the Chicago Seven. They killed them. They murdered them,
yeah,
which is what they would like to do now. So the fact that Fred Hampton is getting something, that's wonderful, because they still got Rat Brown in jail down on some trumped up charge. So they either marginalize them, demonize them, or criminalize them. And those who spoke real truth to power, and unless they made a transition like Marion did, and Andy Young and John Lewis, they took what they learned in the streets and brought it into government to make a difference. Unless they made that transition, they either got exiled or murdered or put in jail.
it's heartbreaking. But one thing that I love that you do, speaking of that transition into a political office, is that you mentor and provide opportunities for young people interested in moving on to politics. You open your house once they're already running for office. You introduce them to the right people and put them in the right places. Why are you passionate about the next generation of leaders?
I think I don't know where it came from, but I've been passionate about young people. I remember I was a very reluctant first lady. And so when Marion won the primary, I was like, excuse the expression, oh shit. So I was sitting on my front porch, and I'm not a first lady type person. I don't do teas, and I don't do those things. It's not who I am. So a reporter asked me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do as first lady? And I was like, I thought to myself, is that a thing? So I said, I don't know, but whatever it is, it's going to be about empowering our young people. I didn't know. I didn't know I was going to do the wish list committee and build the Southeast, but that's what I ended up doing, because that's just in my heart. It may be a passion for me, and maybe some passed on from my mother, but I've always been attractive to I'm looking at these chats now.
I'm like, oh, it's getting deep.
Yeah. So I don't know. Are these questions or what's going on?
They are. If you're willing to answer them and address what's happening, by all means, please.
Okay, so she says, why do they not blame the Democrats for some of the trouble with the protesters? Everything going wrong is not true. Trump's fault. I guess they're trying to say fault.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a question?
Right.
I don't know why anybody is blaming.
Opinion.
I just don't believe that the protesters. What's Trump's fault is not what's Trump's fault is what he is turning the protest into. The people are protesting because of years and years of discrimination, years and years of oppression, years and years of unjust and injustice, murders of our people. That he just is stoking the fire, but it's been there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then somebody else, which I guess you just answered it, saying that it's been there, because somebody else's comment was everything going wrong is Trump's fault.
Right now, because he's adding salt to the wound of what's wrong. But he is certainly not the creator of it.
Any prophetic gifts you think you might have for what's going to happen in November of this year?
Well, I can say this. What has been very disheartening to me is, well, it's a double-edged sword like everything else in life. While I'm really pleased to see the young people paying attention to politics, I am heartbroken at how the propaganda has gotten to the point that they don't quite get and understand what's at stake. There are a lot of things at stake that I could say that they wouldn't even care about, wouldn't be able to relate to, and I don't think they need to. But what they don't seem to get is, you can talk about Kamala, you can talk about Biden, you can go back 20, 30 years if that's what you want to do, and say, oh, they did this or they did it. You can do all of that. But the stakes of this election has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with you. What, as I said to a bunch of young people when they called me and they were giving me all these things that their message, I said, listen, we're going to all die. What is at stake right now is your very life. You are seeing right now these so-called protesters that are supposed to be real protesters, and they're being sent in to do this. When this man, or if this man wins, he will have state-sanctioned genocide, and you all as protesters need to put your protest sign down and get yourself a resume and go get a job, because being out here in the streets would be suicide. If you're worried about what Kamala did when she was a prosecutor, then don't think about that. Think about what's going on right now. Think about our Black people being killed right now. If you're excited that 5 people got let out, rappers out of jail, that's okay. Because they're going out the front door, and the back door is 25,000 of you all coming in, herded in. If you make it to the jail without being killed, your life is at stake. Your life is at stake. And if you can't see that, then you're going to contribute to your own death and your own horrible future. That's just what it is. And so I'm very disturbed, and I vacillate between believing them and thinking they might just want attention, but they really do know better. Mm-hmm. I mean, they do really know better. They know that this is, forget the fact that the man is racist. I would say all of them racist. That's not the point. The point is he's dangerous. He's killing people. He let us die of COVID because he thought it would be better just to fake the news rather than deal with the crisis. So I don't know how this is going to turn out, because if our young Black men especially don't really understand that their life is at stake, they could easily be a part of the problem of us getting this man out of the White House.
No, I just talked to a young Black man yesterday who is adamant about not voting and all of that. And I'm like, no, this is not what we do. This is not how it's supposed to go. Speaking of young Black men, I just want to wrap up, with this. When you did recreation wish list committee, when you were sitting down with those group of collaborators, you all came up with the Southeast Tennis and Learning Center and, as an answer to some of the things that people need, and you all still answer that and try to answer that to this day. And we're seeing an uptick of young people die, particularly in Southeast. It seems like you have a bit of the answer. You've been able to find an antidote to keep a lot of our young people off the streets. What is your advice for now, particularly as you can't be in buildings like the Southeast?
It's very hard. It is very hard. It was easier in the summer for all the obvious reasons. I don't know. With virtual learning, this virus is not going anywhere soon. It's just really hard to know. I don't have the answer for that. I really don't. Even with the Southeast Tennis and Learning Center, we're doing this summer. We usually serve about 150 kids. We serve 25. Not because they didn't want to be there, because of the social distancing and all of that. So I don't know. The kids don't have an outlet.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wish I did know. If I could bring them in the building and change their lives like we used to do, and like we're still doing virtually, yes. But I'm very worried about our young people. They're getting the shortest end of the stick of everybody during this crisis. It's the young people who are really the ones that are going to be carrying the burden and the bruises of this pandemic with them for the rest of their lives in so many ways, for lack of education, falling back, dropping out of school, being in the criminal system. I can just see the all of the ramifications and as it just trickles on from one thing to the other. It's not just missing school, it's missing a whole grade and going past a certain time when you're not even interested. Nobody can make you go. Then if you don't go to school, what you gonna do? How you gonna make your money? And then it just goes on and on. Generations of our kids are being, and I don't believe that that's not a decision or a plan somebody has concocted in one of those rooms you make reference to.
Yeah. I am so thankful for people like you who still open the door, even if it's the virtual door, for conversation for young people. Through your own experiences, putting it through podcasts, putting it, in all the ways that you do, to try to find some inspiration. Before we wrap, I have to say I was really inspired after listening to the town hall after some of the kids, talk about missing prom, having, virtual graduations, not doing it in person. And you said, but this is also one of the most unique opportunities that you have, and all the, all the drive-bys that you'll be able to tell people about. And as a journalist, there's a lot that I've been missing out on this summer, and even right now, this is my hot time where I'm prepping for CBC, getting my interviews ready to go and all of that. But listening to you and you reframing it for those young people allowed me to do some reframing for myself and where we are in general. So as always, I thank you for being an inspiration, for being such a powerful Black woman, and for always speaking truth to power.
Thank you so much, and keep up the good work. I love your newspaper.
Thank you so much. Will do, definitely will do. And as you all know, tuning in, thank you so much. As always, stay tuned for Afro News, the Black Media Authority, and as always, Black Lives Matter.